I told myself I would run if the doors ever opened. I told myself fear was safer than hope. The church was already full when the wind shoved cold through the open doors, rattling hymn books and drawing every eye to the girl at the altar. Her borrowed dress hung loose. Her hands shook around a dying bouquet. 12 steps to freedom, and none of them taken. Across from her stood a man twice her age, silent, steady, richer than the land outside town, offering an arm that did not close around her. By winter's end, the town would whisper her name like a debt. By Christmas, a single gift would freeze every voice in that church. By spring, land would change hands, a door would stay open, and a woman once traded to survive would stand where she chose to remain. She did not know that yet. She only knew one thing as the vows were spoken. He said, "I will, not I do." Stay with this story to the very end. Subscribe for more Western love tales. And tell me, what city are you watching from? The church smelled of old hymn books and damp wool, the kind of smell that clung to a person even after they stepped back into daylight. Cold Christmas wind pushed through the half-open doors and carried whispers down the aisle like grit on a riverbed. Lydia Marlowe stood at the altar in a borrowed wedding dress that did not fit her body or her life. The bodice sagged at the shoulders. The sleeves hung too long over her wrists. Yellowed lace scratched her skin where it should have been soft. She held a small bundle of prairie roses that had wilted in someone else's hands before they ever reached hers. Her palms were wet. Her fingers trembled anyway. 12 floorboards ran from the altar to the doors. She found them without moving her head, counting by the nail heads and the cracks in the pine. 1, 2, 3. The pews were packed. Copper Ridge had come to see a girl get traded for a debt, and they sat with their coats buttoned and their faces set like they'd paid admission. A few women wore pity like perfume. Most wore judgment like iron. Lydia kept her eyes on the floor because every time she looked up, she caught a stare that felt like a hand. Noah shifted against her chest. 7 months and too light for winter. His breath came in tiny clouds against her shawl. He coughed once, a dry little rasp, and Lydia tightened the wool around him and tucked his chin under the fold, the way the doctor in town had shown her before the doctor stopped coming. She pressed her mouth to his cap for half a heartbeat and whispered, "Lord, please," so quietly it could have been the rustle of lace. Across from her stood Caleb Hartwell, 35, tall as a gatepost and wide through the shoulders. He held his hat in both hands, knuckles weathered, the brim bowed slightly, as if he'd been bending it for years. His coat was plain and dark. Dust sat in the seams like the land had claimed him. He looked straight ahead, not at her, not at the crowd, like a man staring at the far edge of a storm. Reverend Asa Pike cleared his throat and opened the Bible as if the pages might steady the room. His voice started out smooth and practiced, but it thinned when he reached the part everybody came for. "Do you?" he said, and Lydia heard her own name like a sentence. "Take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The church leaned in. It wasn't loud. No one dared break the sanctity outright. But the shift of bodies and the hush of hungry silence pressed in around her until it felt hard to breathe. Lydia tasted metal. She licked her lips and found they were cracked. She thought of her father's hands, rough from work, shaking when he'd told her the bank would take the farm. She thought of the drought that had turned their wheat to dust and their well to mud. She thought of a stranger in a clean coat, Garrett Crow, standing in their kitchen like a man who belonged there, sliding papers across the table and smiling with a mouth that never warmed. He had not asked her what she wanted. She counted again. 8, 9, 10. "I do," she whispered. Her voice cracked the way thin ice breaks under a careless step. A murmur traveled through the pews and died against the walls. Reverend Pike swallowed, relieved to move on, and turned to the piece across from her. "And do you, Caleb Hartwell, take this woman?" Caleb's jaw tightened once, just a twitch at the hinge. He didn't look at Lydia. He didn't look at her baby. He didn't look at the faces waiting to see if he'd grin like a buyer. "I will," he said. Not "I do." "I will." The sound of it rolled through the church like distant thunder, low and strange, and Lydia's stomach twisted hard enough that she tightened her grip on the wilted roses to keep from swaying. Reverend Pike blinked as if he hadn't heard right, then decided to keep walking forward because there were no good steps backward from a pulpit. "By the power vested in me," he said, voice steadying as he committed, "I now pronounce you man and wife." The words fell heavy, like a jail door, like a lock turning. Caleb turned then and offered his arm. Lydia stared at it like it might burn her. Her hand hovered in the air. Her fingers shook. She looked at Noah's small fist curled around the edge of her shawl, and the sight of it, his skin, his need, pulled her forward the way a rope pulls a bucket from a well. She placed her fingertips on Caleb's sleeve. His grip closed, careful, not claiming, just steady. They walked down the aisle through a tunnel of eyes. Outside, the wind bit hard and honest. It cut through lace and borrowed cloth. It cut through pride. It cut through lies that had been sitting warm inside the church. Caleb guided her down the steps with a hand at her elbow so light it felt like a question. She flinched anyway. He noticed. He stepped back at once. "My name's Caleb," he said softly, as he gathered the reins to the wagon. "Reckon you know that already." Lydia nodded once because her throat wouldn't make more. "You all right, Miss Marlowe?" The honorific landed like a kindness she didn't know how to carry. She swallowed and forced her mouth to work. "It's Mrs. Hartwell now," she whispered, and the name tasted like bitter bark. Caleb didn't answer right away. He clicked his tongue to the horses and started driving, the wheels creaking over frozen ruts. Copper Ridge watched them leave as if watching a funeral they couldn't stop. "Only if you want it to be," he said at last, looking ahead. Lydia held Noah closer. Snow flurried sideways, thin and sharp as ash. Her breath steamed in front of her face. She kept her eyes on the road, because if she turned back, she might see her father standing in the doorway of their house, hands empty, and she didn't have room inside her for that. "I should have run." The valley opened as they left town, foothills rising dark, pines like black teeth against the pale sky. The Hartwell Ranch showed itself at the end of a long pull. Timber house on stone foundations, wide porch, windows catching the last copper light of day. Smoke curled from the chimney, warm and promising. Lydia felt no warmth. Caleb brought the wagon to a stop and stepped down first. He offered his hand. She looked at it. Then she shifted Noah higher on her chest and climbed down without touching him. Caleb didn't react. He only nodded once, as if he'd been expecting that choice. A man stood near the porch, older, lined, hands stained with work. Silas Boone. He tipped his hat to Caleb, then looked at Lydia and the baby and said nothing at all, which felt strangely like respect. "I'll show you inside," Caleb said, voice careful, as if each word had to pass through a gate. The front room held a stone fireplace, a handmade rug, polished furniture that had been wiped down by someone who believed in order. The house smelled of wood smoke and coffee and clean soap. Lydia's eyes found every exit without her asking them to. "Kitchen's through there," Caleb said, nodding down a hall. "Pantry's full. Silas goes to town Wednesdays." He led her upstairs without walking close behind. At the end of the hall, he stopped at a door and opened it. A room with a four-poster bed, a quilt sewn in blue and cream, a washstand by a window looking out toward distant mountains, and on the inside of the door, a lock. Solid brass, gleaming. Caleb pointed to it like a man pointing to a Bible verse. "Use it if you need to," he said. "I won't knock unless you ask me to. You understand?" Lydia's fingers tightened around Noah's blanket. "Yes," she managed. Caleb stepped back out of the doorway. He didn't linger. He didn't take a last look. He simply left and closed the door with a soft click. Lydia locked it at once. Her hands were shaking so hard, she had to brace her palm on the washstand. Noah's eyes blinked up at her, dark and tired. She sank onto the edge of the bed and stared at her own knuckles until the shaking slowed enough to let her breathe. Below, faintly, she heard the scrape of a chair. Later, the sound of footsteps stopped outside her door. No knock. Just a pause. Then the whisper of fabric against wood. When the hall went quiet again, Lydia cracked the door the width of a finger. A bundle sat on the floorboards. Warm biscuits wrapped in cloth. Heat still trapped inside like a small mercy. She pulled it in and shut the door and stood there with her forehead against the wood for one long breath. "Thank you," she whispered, not to the man, but upward, because if she didn't put it somewhere, it would break her. Downstairs, Caleb ate alone at a table set with 2 plates. Silas's voice drifted once, low from the kitchen. "Town's talking, boss." Caleb's reply came firm and cold as creek ice. "Town can keep talking. They say you got yourself a pretty bargain." "She's not a bargain," Caleb said. Something in that sentence made Lydia's grip loosen on the door handle. Just a fraction. She didn't open it wider. She didn't step out. But she listened. "She's my wife," Caleb finished, and there was no pride in it, only a boundary. A gust hit the house. The window glass shivered. Somewhere in the rafters, something creaked like a warning. Then there was hoofbeat on the yard below, fast, light. A boy's voice rose from the porch. "Mr. Hartwell, message for you." Lydia held still. Noah's breath warmed her collarbone. Caleb took the paper from the boy. Lydia couldn't see the writing, but she saw Caleb's jaw set, the way a man's face changes when he hears the click of a trap. He folded the note once and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. His eyes lifted, not to her door, but to the darkening horizon beyond the window. "Don't be afraid tonight," he called, not loud, not soft, just certain. Lydia's hand found the brass lock again, and her thumb rested on it like a prayer held back. Outside, the wind kept coming. The first night on the Hartwell ranch came down like a lid. Wind worried the eaves. Snow skittered across the porch boards in thin, scratching sheets. The fire in the downstairs hearth burned steady, but the upstairs room held its own cold. Old wood, mountain air, and the kind of quiet that made every creak sound like a footstep. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed with Noah pressed to her chest, his small body rising and falling in quick little climbs. She had eaten one biscuit in 3 bites, the heat of it soft in her mouth, and she had saved the rest wrapped in cloth beside the washstand, like it might be worth more than money by morning. Her fingers kept finding the brass lock, not turning it, just touching it, counting it, remembering it was there. Downstairs, a chair scraped once. A plate clinked. Then nothing. The house had the same feeling as a church after everyone leaves. Too much space, too many shadows, too many thoughts that don't belong to you. Lydia listened until her ears ached with it. Noah coughed. Not loud. Just a dry rasp that stirred panic in her ribs. She shifted him higher and rubbed his back in slow circles through the blanket, the way her mother had done when she was small and fevered. His breath came in puffs that smelled faintly of milk and cold. Lydia pressed her mouth to his cap again. "Lord," she whispered, "please." I don't know what else to say. A sound came from the yard. Hoofbeats, light and quick. Then the hollow thud of boots on porch boards. A boy's voice carried by wind. "Mr. Hartwell, message for you." Lydia froze. The rustle of paper. A low thank you. Then the boy's feet ran back down the steps, and the hoofbeats faded into the dark. For a long moment there was only the wind again. Then Caleb's voice rose through the stairwell, not loud, not soft, certain. "Don't be afraid tonight." Lydia swallowed. Her hand tightened around the edge of the quilt. She waited for more, an explanation, an apology, a promise. Nothing came. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like a man setting a post in the ground and walking away. The lamp on her washstand burned low. Its flame flickered each time the wind found a crack in the window frame. Lydia watched it until her eyes blurred, until Noah's breathing slowed, until her own shoulders finally dropped a fraction. Sleep did not come all at once. It came in pieces, 5 minutes, 10, broken by the snap of the wood cooling, by Noah's cough, by her own mind turning in circles around the same question. What kind of man says I will instead of I do? Toward midnight, she heard it. A soft scrape, barely there. Not inside the hall, outside. Something touched the porch rail. Something bumped the step. Lydia sat up so fast the bed creaked. Her heart slammed hard enough to make her teeth ache. She clutched Noah close and held her breath. Another sound. A faint, testing knock against the doorframe below. Not the front door. The side door. Lydia's eyes went to the brass lock again. She slid off the bed and moved to the door without thinking. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing but wind and the faint hiss of the lamp. Then a voice. Muffled, male, unfamiliar. "Silas?" it called. "You awake?" Lydia felt her throat go tight. Noah stirred. His breath hitched. She backed away from the door and stood with her spine against the wall, clutching him, listening so hard she could hear her own blood. Downstairs, a heavier step crossed the front room. A chair shifted. Then Caleb's voice cut through the dark like a blade drawn slow. "Who's out there?" The reply came with a laugh that wasn't friendly. "Just passing through, Hartwell. Thought I saw your light." "Keep passing," Caleb said. A pause. The wind filled it, hungry. "Town's got a mind to see what kind of bargain you brought home," the man said, voice slick with drink or courage. "Some folks don't like surprises at Christmas." Caleb's answer came quiet. Too quiet. "This is my house." Another pause. Lydia imagined the porch boards, the moonlight on snow, a stranger's boots leaving prints that would still be there at dawn. She imagined her father's kitchen, the stranger in the clean coat, the papers on the table. Not again. Caleb spoke again, low and even. "Silas will fetch the sheriff if you don't clear my steps." That did it, a muttered curse. Boots thudded down the stairs. The yard went empty. Lydia stayed against the wall until her lungs burned. Downstairs, she heard Caleb bolt the door. One clean, solid slide of iron. Then his footsteps moved away. No knock came at her door. That, more than anything, made her eyes sting. Morning came gray, the kind of gray that makes everything look unfinished. Snow lay in a thin sheet over the porch and the yard, softening the world into silence. Lydia woke with Noah's cough in her ear and the ache of too little sleep in her bones. She sat up and held him close. His cheeks were warm, but his hands were cold, even under the blanket. When he coughed again, his breath whistled a little at the end. Lydia swallowed fear like dry bread. She unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The hall was empty, quiet, cold, but a folded wool blanket sat on the floor outside her threshold, thick and clean. Next to it, a small tin cup with honeyed tea gone lukewarm. No note, no knock, no claim. Just provision. She pulled them in, closed the door, and sat with Noah on her lap while she warmed the tea in her hands. A little later she heard voices below. Silas's, careful. "Heard someone on the porch last night." Caleb answered. "Town's bold this time of year," Silas went on. "More drink, more sermons. Folks get righteous when the snow comes." Caleb's reply came measured, like a man counting fence posts. "If they come again, you wake me." "Yes, sir." Lydia's throat tightened. She looked at the brass lock again, then at Noah. Then at the empty space in the room where her life used to be. She could not keep doing this alone. She unlocked the door and stepped into the hall. Her bare feet found the cold boards. She moved slowly, not wanting to make noise, not wanting to announce herself like a confession. At the top of the stairs, she stopped and gripped the banister until her fingers turned white. Below, Caleb stood by the hearth, coat half on, hat in hand. He looked up as if he'd sensed her before she made a sound. His eyes flicked to Noah, then to Lydia, then away, giving her space the way some men gave money. "You need something," he said, not a question, not a demand, a plain statement. Noah coughed again, small and stubborn. Lydia tightened her hold. He's not right," she managed. Caleb's face changed, only at the edges, only enough that a person paying attention could see it. He didn't rush toward them. He didn't reach. He turned his head and called, "Silas!" Silas appeared from the kitchen doorway. "Yes, boss?" "Ride to Doc Kent," Caleb said. "Now. Tell her it's a baby. Tell her it's urgent." Silas didn't ask whose baby. He only nodded and went for his coat. Lydia watched him leave, the back door closing with a soft thump that felt like a seal on a prayer. Caleb set his hat on the table. 2 plates were laid out again. Habit or hope. He moved 1 plate aside without looking at it and pulled a chair back. "You can sit," he said. Lydia did not sit. She stayed standing near the edge of the room, Noah against her chest, like a shield and a wound all at once. Caleb glanced at her, then at the floor between them, as if marking a boundary line he would not cross. He reached for a kettle and poured hot water into a cup, then pushed it toward her across the table. No words sweetened it. No apology. Just heat. Lydia's hands shook as she took it. Caleb watched the cup, not her face, but his song. "You got any medicine left from town?" "A little," she said. "Not enough." He nodded once, and the nod held more weight than most men's speeches. Doc Miriam Kent arrived before noon with her cheeks red from cold and her bag thumping against her side. She smelled of camphor and clean hands. She stepped into the house like she belonged to no one but her work. "Where's the child?" she asked. Brisk, no ceremony. Lydia held Noah out, and the doctor took him without hesitation, tucking his small body into the crook of her arm like she had done it 1,000 times. She listened to his chest, checked his mouth, felt his forehead. "Winter cough," she said finally, eyes narrowed. "Could turn. He needs warmth steady, no drafts, honey in small amounts, and someone to keep watch." Lydia's stomach clenched. "I do," she said, too quickly. Doc Kent's gaze shifted to her, sharp, assessing, then softened, just a degree. "I'm sure you do," she said. "But you can't keep him alive on willpower alone." Caleb stood a few paces back, hands at his sides, not crowding. "What do you need?" he asked. "Wood," Doc Kent said. "Blankets. And keep him near the fire. Not upstairs where the wind lives." Lydia's throat tightened again, because upstairs was where she could lock the door. Caleb nodded, already moving. "Silas'll split wood. I'll seal the window gaps." Doc Kent handed Noah back to Lydia and gave her a small vial. "If his breathing gets worse, you send for me, day or night." Lydia clutched the vial like a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. Doc Kent's eyes flicked toward Caleb. "You," she said simply. Caleb met her gaze without flinching. "Ma'am." The doctor's mouth tightened as if she was holding back a judgment or a prayer. Then she turned and left, boots thudding on the porch like punctuation. The rest of the day became a string of necessary things. Silas brought in armloads of wood. Caleb stuffed cloth into the window seams downstairs. Lydia laid Noah's blankets near the hearth and sat on the rug with him in her lap, rocking slightly, counting his breaths. Caleb ate standing by the counter, a few bites, then put the rest on a plate and set it within reach of Lydia without saying a word. He didn't sit beside her. He didn't touch her shoulder. He didn't ask where she came from. He just kept the house from falling apart. As dusk settled, the wind rose again. The porch boards complained. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped. Lydia watched the front door as if it might open on its own. Caleb checked the bolt once. Then he walked toward the stairs, stopped, and looked back at her. His eyes did not linger on her face. They went to Noah, then to the brass key in Lydia's hand, because she had carried it downstairs without thinking. "You can lock it," he said, voice low. "Any time." Lydia swallowed. The fire snapped softly. Noah's breathing sounded steadier with the heat. Caleb's gaze dropped, respectful, and he turned away. That night, Lydia did not go upstairs. She laid out a pallet near the hearth. She kept Noah close. She kept the brass key in her fist until her knuckles ached. And when the lamp burned low and the house creaked under wind, she did one small thing she had not done the night before. She left the bedroom door upstairs cracked. Not wide, just enough for lamplight to spill into the hall, like a signal she couldn't say out loud. Then she whispered into Noah's cap, "God, carry us," and listened to the fire answer with its steady, faithful breath. Morning settled into the house without asking permission. Gray light slid across the floorboards and stopped at the edge of the hearth where the coals still breathed. Lydia woke with Noah's weight warm against her chest and the faint ache of staying alert too long. She listened first. Wind, wood, the low tick of the clock on the wall. No footsteps on the porch. Noah slept, mouth parted, breath steadier than it had been the night before. Lydia counted, slow, careful, then pressed her cheek to his cap and let herself breathe. Downstairs, the kettle began to sing. She rose quietly, lifting Noah with her, and moved toward the kitchen. Caleb stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair damp from cold water, setting out cups as if the morning had always belonged to him. He glanced up once, then back to the kettle. "Doc say anything else?" he asked. "She said keep him warm," Lydia answered. "No drafts." Caleb nodded. He slid a cup toward her, steam lifting. Honey had already been stirred in. 2 plates sat on the table. He took one away without comment and leaned against the counter to eat, eyes on the window where the light was changing. Silas came in with snow on his shoulders and the look of a man who had news he did not like. "Town's stirring," he said. "Church ladies already talking about the Christmas social. Invitations went out yesterday." Caleb set his cup down. The sound was small, but it landed. "Anything else?" he asked. Silas hesitated. "Garrett Crow's been asking questions. At the bank, at the store. About arrangements." Lydia felt the word like a hand closing around her ribs. She kept her eyes on Noah, kept rocking. Caleb's jaw tightened once. "Let him ask." There was a knock at the door. Not loud. Certain. Silas went to answer. A boy stood on the step with red ears and a folded envelope in his mittened hand. "For Mrs. Hartwell," the boy said, eyes darting past Silas into the house. Silas took the envelope. He did not hand it to Lydia. He carried it to Caleb. The seal bore the church's mark. Caleb broke it open and read without expression. He folded the paper once, then again, smaller and smaller, like a man deciding how much of a thing he needed to keep. "They want us Sunday," Silas said. "Welcome reception. Christmas prayers. Whole town." Lydia lifted her eyes. "Do we have to go?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb's answer came fast. "No." The certainty of it startled her more than if he had argued. Silas shifted. "That won't sit well." Caleb walked to the hearth. He knelt and pushed the folded paper into the coals. The flame caught, quick and bright, curling the words into black petals. The church seal burned last. There, Caleb said. It's set. Silas exhaled through his teeth. You're lighting a fuse. Caleb stood. I'm keeping a promise. Lydia watched the ashes collapse and felt something inside her loosen, then tighten again in a new place. Relief carried its own danger. By noon, the wind rose. Snow came in thicker sheets, turning the yard into a blur of white and shadow. Lydia stayed near the fire, feeding it, measuring Noah's breaths, taking a sip of tea when her hands shook too much to be useful. A wagon pulled up near the porch. She saw it through the window before she heard the knock. Garrett Crow stood when the door opened, coat clean, gloves new, smile practiced. He held his hat against his chest like a man in church. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, voice smooth as oiled leather. "Christmas greetings." Caleb did not invite him in. He stood in the doorway and blocked the view beyond. "What do you want?" he asked. Garrett's eyes slid past him, found Lydia by the hearth, the baby in her arms. His smile sharpened. "Just checking on the arrangements, making sure all parties are comfortable." Caleb did not move. "Arrangements are done." Garrett laughed softly. "You paid the bank. Fine work. But some things don't settle so easy. Church has a say. Town has a say." He leaned in a fraction. "And there's paperwork yet. Questions about guardianship. A child changes the picture." Lydia felt her stomach drop. She shifted Noah higher and stood, meeting Garrett's gaze for the first time since the kitchen in her father's house. "I take care of my son," she said. Garrett smiled wider. "Of course you do, but the law—" Caleb's voice cut in, low. "You don't speak to her." Garrett's eyes flicked to Caleb. "She's part of the agreement." "No," Caleb said. "She isn't." For a moment, the wind filled the space between them, pressing snow against the doorframe like listening ears. Garrett straightened. "I'll see you Sunday," he said lightly. "Church or not, this town keeps accounts." He stepped back into the snow. Caleb closed the door and set the bolt with a clean slide of iron. Lydia realized she was holding her breath. The afternoon wore on with work. Silas split wood. Caleb sealed another draft along the west window. Lydia measured honey and water, fed Noah, watched his chest rise and fall. As dusk settled, the wind eased. The sky cleared to a hard, cold blue. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang for evening prayers, thin and persistent. Lydia felt the pull of it like a tide. She pressed her lips together and kept stirring the pot. Caleb ate standing again. He wrapped a portion in cloth and set it beside Lydia without comment. He did not sit. He did not ask her to. After supper, Silas retired to his room. The house grew larger with the quiet. Caleb took the poker and shifted the logs. Sparks jumped and died. "About Sunday," Lydia said finally. He looked at her, attentive, waiting. "If they come here," she went on, choosing each word like a stone to step on, "what happens to Noah?" Caleb's eyes dropped to the baby. He considered, not long, not short. "No one takes a child out of this house," he said. "Not without a fight." The word lodged in her chest. "I don't want trouble," she said. Caleb nodded. "Neither do I." That night, Lydia took Noah upstairs when the cold crept in again. She locked the door out of habit. then unlocked it and sat on the bed, the brass key warm in her palm. She laid Noah down and listened. Downstairs, Caleb moved about with purpose, checking the doors, the windows, the bolt. No knock came to her door. No voice. Later, she heard him stop outside her room. A pause, then the soft sound of something placed on the floor. She opened the door a crack. A bundle of clean cloth lay there, flannel, thick and new. Beneath it, a small wooden star, simple and smooth, the grain catching the lamplight. For a moment, she could not move. She pulled the bundle in and closed the door, pressing her back against it. The star warmed quickly in her hand, as if it had been waiting. "Thank you," she whispered, because the word fit again. Downstairs, Caleb sat at the table with a ledger open. He did not write. He stared at the numbers like a man measuring distance. Sunday came closer. The next day, the town sent no one. The day after, a woman passed the gate and did not wave. On the third day, a boy rode up with a paper from the church. Caleb read it at the hearth. "This one's an invitation," he said, and the word held no warmth. He folded it and held it over the fire. Lydia watched. "Do you want me to?" she began. Caleb shook his head. He dropped the paper into the flames. It flared, then fell to ash. The smell of burning ink rose and vanished. That night, Lydia packed a small bag and hid it under the bed without knowing why. She tucked the wooden star into Noah's blanket. She did not tell herself what it meant. "I can't let them take him." On Saturday evening, the wind died completely. Snow lay smooth and unbroken in the yard. The quiet felt like a held breath. Caleb stood at the window, watching the road. "If they come tomorrow," Lydia said, voice low, "I'll go to the doctor. I'll get papers." Caleb turned. "We'll do it together." The word "together" startled her. He went back to the window. When she lay down, Lydia left the door cracked again, just enough for light to spill into the hall. Downstairs, Caleb closed the ledger. He banked the fire to a steady glow. Outside, Copper Ridge gathered its courage in the dark. The morning broke clean and hard, the kind of cold that rang when you breathed. Lydia woke before the light reached the window, Noah warm and heavy against her chest. His breathing held steady through the night, each rise and fall a small mercy. She counted twice before she trusted it, then eased herself up and dressed without waking him. Downstairs, the stove had already been coaxed to life. The smell of coffee reached the stairwell, dark and bitter, grounding. Lydia paused at the top step with the brass key in her hand, then slipped it into her pocket instead of turning it. She went down. Caleb stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, pouring water slow so it wouldn't slosh. He glanced up when she reached the bottom step and moved without comment, sliding a cup across the table until it stopped near her hand. Honey sat beside it. A spoon. No question. She took the cup and wrapped her fingers around the heat. Noah stirred and made a small sound, more complaint than cough. Lydia shifted him higher, careful of the cold air near the floor. 2 plates waited on the table. Caleb took one away and leaned back against the counter to eat. He kept his eyes on the window, where the yard lay smooth and white, untouched. Silas came in with a bucket of water and a look that meant he'd already seen too much of the morning. "Store's got eyes today," he said. Folks weighing flour like it's gold, and Garrett Crow's been busy. Caleb swallowed and set his cup down. Doing what? Talking, Silas said. Always talking. Asking who's sleeping where. Who's watching the child. Says he's just concerned. Lydia felt the words settle like frost along her spine. She took a sip of coffee and held the cup there, steadying her hands. Caleb nodded once. He's not stepping on this land. Silas glanced at Lydia, then away. Sheriff might come by. Ask questions. Caleb's eyes moved to Lydia then, not searching her face but checking her stance. Feet planted, shoulders square, the baby secure. He nodded again, slower this time. Let him, he said. After breakfast, Silas hitched the team and headed for town with a short list and a longer look over his shoulder. Lydia watched from the window until the wagon disappeared past the pines. She turned back to the room. The fire needed feeding. The kettle needed filling. Noah needed changing. The day asked for work. She gave it. Caleb spent the morning sealing the last draft along the west window, hammering in short, sure strokes. Lydia worked the kitchen, cutting bread, measuring out the honey, setting a pot to simmer. The rhythm of it steadied her, the scrape of knife on board, the hiss of steam, the soft crackle of fire. When Noah fussed, she took him up and paced the length of the room, counting steps without meaning to. 8 to the hearth. 8 back. She hummed a hymn under her breath, one her mother used to sing on long nights when the wind found the house. The words came back, rough but true. Caleb listened without turning. Near noon, Lydia tied her shawl tight and lifted Noah higher. I need milk, she said, and more cloth. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. I'll go. She shook her head. I can. The word hung between them. Choice. Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll walk with you. They took the wagon, slow over the frozen ruts. Lydia kept Noah tucked close, her eyes on the road. Copper Ridge came into view like a thing holding its breath. At the general store, the bell over the door rang thin and bright. Mrs. Hawkins stood behind the counter, her hair pinned tight, her hands white with flour. She looked up, then away. What'll it be? She asked, voice flat. Milk, Lydia said. Cloth. Mrs. Hawkins weighed the flour without looking at her. A woman near the stove whispered into her glove. A man by the barrels smirked. Caleb stood at Lydia's shoulder, not touching, close enough to be felt. Outside, a drunk leaned against a post, hat tipped low. Well now, he called. Christmas came early for some folks. How's married life, Mrs. Hartwell? Old rancher treat you gentle? Heat climbed Lydia's neck. She opened her mouth. Caleb stepped forward first. His voice stayed low, even. You got something to say? You say it to me. The man's grin faltered. He looked Caleb up and down, then at the wagon, then at the street where more eyes had turned their way. Didn't mean nothin', he muttered. Then say nothin', Caleb said. The man pushed off the post and wandered away, his courage spent. Lydia stood very still. Her hands trembled once, then stopped. On the ride back, she stared at the bundled cloth in her lap and did not speak. The wagon creaked. The sky held. At the ranch, Caleb helped her down without touching her arm, his hand hovering until she had her footing. She nodded, a small acknowledgement she did not think she would ever give. That afternoon, Lydia patched a tear in Caleb's work shirt with thick thread and careful stitches. She did not ask permission. She left it folded on the table when she was done. Caleb picked it up later and ran his thumb along the seam. He said nothing. He set a sack of flour on the pantry shelf where Lydia could reach it. As dusk came on, Silas returned with the wagon and a set jaw. "Saw the sheriff?" he said. "He'll come by tomorrow. Says it's routine." Caleb nodded. "We'll be here." Lydia's stomach tightened. She pressed Noah closer and went to lay him near the hearth, adding another blanket to keep the warmth in. That night, the wind stayed down. The quiet pressed closer instead. Caleb ate standing again. He wrapped a portion and slid it across the table to Lydia. She took it and met his eyes for the first time without flinching. "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head. "You're welcome." Later, when the house settled, Lydia climbed the stairs with Noah and paused at her door. She unlocked it, stepped inside, then stopped. She set Noah down and crossed to the washstand. The brass key lay heavy in her palm. She turned it once, then turned it back. Downstairs, she heard Caleb's steps slow outside her room. He did not knock. He did not speak. She opened the door a hand's width. He stood there with a cup of coffee, steam rising. He set it on the floor just inside the threshold and stepped back, eyes lowered. "For when you wake," he said. She nodded. He turned away. Lydia sat on the bed and watched the door until the light from the hall stretched across the floor like a promise. She sipped the coffee while it was still warm and held Noah close. Tomorrow would bring questions, papers, men with badges and clean hands. Tonight, she let the warmth stay. "I will endure." Downstairs, Caleb banked the fire and checked the bolt one last time. He stood in the quiet kitchen with the ledger closed and his hat on the table, listening to the house breathe. Outside, Copper Ridge gathered its words. Inside, the cup waited where it had been pushed, close enough to reach, far enough to choose. The sheriff arrived with the light. His horse blew steam and stamped once, leaving a crescent in the snow by the gate. The badge on his coat caught the sun and gave it back dull, like it had learned not to shine too hard in this town. Lydia watched from the window with Noah pressed to her chest. She counted breaths and held the count when the knock came. Caleb opened the door before the second knock landed. "Morning, Sheriff," he said. "Morning, Hartwell." Sheriff Boone Caro stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. He did not take his hat off right away. His eyes moved, room, hearth, stairs, then settled on Lydia. He nodded once, not smiling, not frowning. "Ma'am." "Sheriff," Lydia answered, because she had been raised to answer men with badges, and because answering kept doors from closing. Boone cleared his throat. "Routine questions. Town's been lively." "Town always is," Caleb said. Boone's gaze drifted to Noah. He softened there, just a notch. "How's the boy?" "Better with the heat," Lydia said. "Doctor's seen him." Boone nodded. "Good." He shifted his weight. "Any trouble here?" Caleb answered without looking at Lydia. "No." Boone let the words sit. "Anyone been asking you to leave? Anyone trying to come onto your land?" Caleb met his eyes. "One man talked too much. He left." Boone's mouth twitched. "That'll be Garrett." Lydia's fingers tightened in Noah's blanket. Boone glanced at her again, then at the stairs. "Ma'am," he said, careful, "I've got to ask, who's minding the child?" "I am," Lydia said. Boone studied her hands, the way they held the baby, not white-knuckled, not slack. "All the time?" "Yes." "And if you needed help?" Lydia did not look at Caleb. "I'd ask." Boone nodded, slow. "That's enough for me today." He replaced his hat. "Christmas brings out the best and worst in folks. I don't need to be invited back." He stepped outside. The cold rushed in and then was gone again. Lydia let her breath out in a long line she hadn't known she was holding. After, the house found its work. Caleb split wood until his shoulders steamed. Silas mended a hinge on the shed. Lydia fed Noah and set him down near the hearth, where the warmth stayed steady. She washed cups, wiped the table, put the kettle back where it belonged. When the sun climbed, Caleb led a chestnut mare out of the barn. The horse's eyes were soft. Her ears flicked, listening. "That one's Clementine," he said. "She's kind." Lydia watched from the porch. "I don't ride," she said. Caleb looped the reins over the rail. "You can learn." The word can landed gentler than should. She hesitated. Noah slept, breath easy. The world did not end when she set him down. "I'll show you," Caleb said, and held out the reins. Not the saddle, not her arm. The reins. Lydia took them. Clementine shifted her weight and waited. Caleb showed her how to stand, how to place her foot, how to breathe with the horse instead of against her. He kept his hands to himself unless they were needed, and when they were, they stayed brief. "Don't pull," he said. "Guide." Lydia mounted with her jaw set and her eyes forward. The horse stepped once, twice. Lydia's heart thudded, then found the rhythm. She laughed, a short, surprised sound that startled her more than the movement. Caleb smiled. It changed his face and then was gone. They circled the yard. Lydia's shoulders dropped a fraction. She loosened her grip. "That's it," Caleb said. "She'll meet you halfway." Halfway. The word stayed with her. They rode into town on Wednesday with the wagon loaded and Noah bundled tight. Copper Ridge watched from doorways and windows, from behind gloves and ledgers. At the store, Mrs. Hawkins weighed flour and did not look up. Lydia did not flinch this time. She counted her coins and took her change and turned to go. Outside, a man leaned against the post again, breath sour. "Still here, Mrs. Hartwell?" he called. "Thought Christmas might buy you a conscience." Caleb stepped between them. His voice stayed low. "Say it to me." The man squinted, then spat into the snow and backed off, muttering. Lydia felt the heat in her chest and let it pass without words. Back at the ranch, she patched another tear in Caleb's shirt. She did it at the table with the afternoon light on her hands. The stitches went in straight and came out strong. Caleb saw the shirt later. He folded it and put it on. He did not thank her. That night, Silas found boot prints near the fence. Fresh, shallow, not made by anyone who belonged. "They're testing," Silas said. Caleb nodded. "We'll watch." Lydia listened from the stairs. She carried Noah up and set him down. She locked the door, then unlocked it and left it that way. Downstairs, Caleb banked the fire and set a bowl of stew on the table. He wrapped bread and placed it outside her door without knocking. She opened the door and took it in. She left the door open a hand's width. I choose this much, she thought, and felt the thought settle. Later, when the house slept, the wind rose again. Snow whispered along the siding. Lydia lay awake and listened. Footsteps crossed the porch. Her heart jumped and then stilled. Caleb's voice carried through the wood, calm as a held line. You're done here. A pause. A curse. Boots retreated. Lydia did not move until the night swallowed the sound. Morning came pale. Noah's cough did not return. Lydia took the brass key in her hand and set it on the washstand instead of her pocket. Downstairs, Caleb poured coffee and slid a cup toward the empty place at the table. He did not look up when she sat. She wrapped her fingers around the heat. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. Outside, Clementine nickered, patient, waiting for the reins to be taken. The day did not promise mercy. It offered work. Lydia took the cup and drank, and when she set it down, she did not set it back. Night came early and clean, the kind that sharpened the edges of things. The wind eased after supper, leaving the yard hushed and bright under a hard spill of stars. Lydia carried Noah upstairs and laid him down, then paused with the brass key in her hand. She set it on the washstand and did not touch it again. Downstairs, the house settled into its bones. She woke to light. Not the gray of morning, but a steady amber glow that pressed itself through the cracks of the door and traced a thin line across the floor. Lydia sat up, heart quickening, and listened. The porch lamp was lit. She pulled on her shawl and moved to the window. The yard lay still. Frost caught the rails. By the steps, a shape stood where there should have been none. Caleb. He stood under the lamp with his coat buttoned and his hat in his hands. Snow dusted his shoulders. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't watching the road. He was looking down at something he held close to his chest, the way a man holds a letter he never plans to send. Lydia waited. She did not call out. She did not go back to bed. Noah breathed evenly behind her. After a long moment, she opened the door and stepped into the hall. The lamp's light spilled up the stairwell, warm and careful. She went down, slow, each step a choice. The cold met her at the threshold and stopped there, as if it had learned its place. Caleb looked up when he heard her, surprise crossing his face and leaving just as quickly. He did not hide what he held. He did not offer it. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said. "You didn't," Lydia answered. She stopped 2 steps away and wrapped her shawl tighter. The lamp hummed softly above them. They stood like that, the house behind them, the land opening away into dark. "What's wrong?" she asked. Caleb looked down at his hands again. He turned the object once, then set it on the porch rail between them and stepped back. A photograph. The paper had gone soft at the edges. The image was clear enough. A woman with kind eyes holding a small child, both bundled against cold. The woman's mouth curved like she had been caught mid-laugh. The child's hand gripped her collar. "My wife," Caleb said, "and our boy." Lydia felt the words like a quiet drop in deep water. "They died," he went on, not rushing it. 5 winters back, fever." "I'm sorry," Lydia said, Because it was the right thing and because it was true. Caleb nodded. He did not look at the photograph again. So am I. The lamp flickered once. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and fell silent. I keep the light on when the nights get like this, he said. Doesn't mean I expect anyone. Lydia picked up the photograph. The paper was warm where his hands had been. She studied it, not prying, just seeing what had been offered. They look loved, she said. They were, Caleb said. He drew a breath, slow and controlled. Loving them doesn't mean I stop living. It doesn't mean I can't care for someone else. The words hung between them. Not a claim, not a plea, a truth. Lydia set the photograph back on the rail and pushed it toward him. He took it and slipped it into his coat. She looked past him, at the fence line, at the dark beyond. Christmas is close, she said. Yes. My mother used to light a candle every night, Lydia said. Said it was for the travelers who'd lost their way. Caleb's mouth tightened, just a fraction. Seems right. They stood in silence again. It felt different now, less like waiting for a blow, more like listening for weather. Lydia turned back toward the door. I should check on Noah. Caleb nodded. He reached out, then stopped himself, his hand hovering uselessly before falling back to his side. Good night, he said. Good night, she answered. She went inside and closed the door, leaving the lamp to burn where it was. Upstairs, she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms together until the chill left them. Noah slept on, small and certain. She whispered a prayer she half remembered, one that thanked God for light that didn't ask questions. The next day broke brittle and bright. Silas came in from the barn with news and the smell of cold clinging to him. Town's pressing, he said. Church socials set for Sunday. Every woman's expected. Caleb set his cup down. We won't be there. Lydia looked up. The room held its breath. I'll go, she said. Caleb's eyes met hers, sharp and searching. You don't have to. I know, she said, but I need to. The truth of it steadied her. She felt it settle in her bones, the way a tool does when it's finally in the right place. Silas glanced between them and nodded once. Sheriff'll be there, he said. For show, if nothing else. Good, Lydia said. The days leading up to Sunday stretched thin and slow. Lydia worked the house and the yard. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, when to bank the fire, how to break ice at the trough, which boards complained and which held. She patched and mended and counted what they had and what they'd need to make it through another week of cold. Caleb rode into town twice and came back with papers tucked into his coat and a look that said nothing he did would be simple again. At night, the lamp burned on the porch. Lydia noticed it without comment. She stopped locking the door upstairs. On Saturday, she took the wooden star Caleb had left by her door days before and threaded a strip of blue cloth through it. She tied it to Noah's cradle where it caught the light. Sunday morning came clear and cruel. The church parlor smelled of tea and polished wood, and too many people trying not to look at one another. Voices dipped when Lydia entered. Eyes followed her like a second shadow. She took a chair near the wall and kept Noah close. Mrs. Dalton stepped forward with a smile sharpened by habit. So tell us, she said, voice bright. How does it feel to be bought like livestock? A ripple of laughter followed, thin and quick. Lydia felt something inside her crack, clean, precise. She stood. The chair scraped loud against the floor, a sound that cut through the room like a bell. "My father was desperate," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Your husbands would have let us starve and called it business. Do not judge me for surviving." Silence fell. Someone set a cup down too hard. Lydia turned and walked out, her back straight, Noah warm against her chest. The cold hit her face and steadied her breath. She walked all the way home. Caleb found her on the porch an hour later, her hands white around the rail, her eyes fixed on nothing. She told him what had been said. He listened without interruption. "They won't speak to you like that again," he said. "You can't control them," she answered. "No," he said, stepping closer. "But I can make sure they hear me louder." She looked up at him then. "I trust you." The words surprised them both. That night, Lydia packed a small bag and set it by the door. She wrote a letter with hands that trembled only once. She folded it and placed it on the table where Caleb would find it at dawn. Kindness, she had learned, could cut deeper than cruelty. Morning came pale and cold. She lifted the bag and turned toward the stairs. Caleb stood in the doorway to the kitchen, the letter open in his hands. He looked older in the morning light, tired in a way that reached past sleep. "You are free to go," he said quietly. "You always were." Her eyes filled. The bag slipped from her fingers and landed with a soft thud. "Then why does it feel so hard to leave?" she asked. Caleb took one step toward her, then stopped, giving her space the way he always had. "Why did you really marry me?" she asked. "Not the excuse, the truth." He breathed in, slow. "Because when I saw you at that altar, scared and alone, I thought maybe we could both stop being lonely." The choice settled in her chest, heavy and calm all at once. Lydia bent, picked up the bag, carried it back to her room, and unpacked every last thing. When she returned, she placed the crumpled letter in Caleb's hands. "I choose you," she said. "I choose us." Relief crossed his face, quiet and real. "Then let me do something for us," he said. "You'll see on Sunday." She nodded. "I trust you," she said again. Outside, the porch lamp burned steady against the coming dark, and the photograph lay safe in Caleb's coat, close to his heart. Monday did not soften the world. It came sharp and bright, frost locked into the ground like a warning. Lydia woke with Noah warm and heavy beside her, and the memory of Sunday still sitting tight behind her eyes. She dressed without hurry. There was nothing left to hide from. Downstairs, Caleb had already saddled the horse. He stood at the table with papers spread in a careful line. Bank receipts, a folded deed map, a note from Doc Kent with her neat, slanted hand. He looked up when Lydia came in, then back down, as if this work required the same respect as prayer. "I'll be riding into town," he said. "Maybe twice this week." Lydia nodded. "I'll keep the fire steady." He hesitated, then slid one paper toward her. "This stays here, in your keeping." She read it once and understood enough to know it mattered. She folded it and tucked it into the back of her book, where the spine was cracked but strong. "I'll be here," she said. Caleb took his hat and stopped at the door. "If anyone comes—" "I know," Lydia said. I don't open it." He nodded once and stepped into the cold. The days that followed took on the shape of waiting. Lydia learned the sound of Caleb's boots on the porch and the sound of the yard when it held no one. She kept Noah near the hearth, counted his breaths, warmed honey, mended cloth. She broke ice at the trough and hauled water with shoulders that ached by nightfall. Each afternoon, she walked the fence line with Clementine at a slow pace, reins loose in her hands. The mare met her halfway. Lydia learned to trust the ground beneath her feet again. In town, Caleb rode from office to office, hat in hand, voice low. He paid what could be paid. He signed where signing cut ties. He listened when men tried to explain the world to him and waited until they finished before placing his own facts on the table. Garrett Crow watched from doorways. On Wednesday, Caleb came home late with a set jaw and snow in his hair. "They're pushing," he said, shrugging off his coat. "Talking about water rights. Old claims." Lydia set a plate in front of him and waited. "They'll try to make this about legality," he went on, "as if papers can tell you who belongs where." Lydia thought of the brass lock, the door she no longer closed. "Can they take Noah?" Caleb met her eyes. "No." The word was steady. That night, Lydia woke to wind again. She rose and checked the door without thinking, then stopped herself and went back to bed. The lamp on the porch burned on. Friday brought more snow and a visitor Lydia had not expected. Mrs. Hawkins stood at the gate, hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes fixed on the ground. "I won't stay," she said when Lydia stepped out. I brought something." She held out a bundle of cloth. Inside were 2 jars of milk and a sack of sugar. "My sister lost a boy once," Mrs. Hawkins said, voice tight. "Winter." Lydia took the bundle. "Thank you." Mrs. Hawkins nodded, then turned and walked away without another word. That evening, Caleb came in carrying a small wooden box under his arm. He set it on the table and did not open it. "What's that?" Lydia asked. "A gift," he said. "For Sunday." She looked at the box and felt a pull she did not understand yet. "For who?" "For you," Caleb said. "For the town." Saturday passed in quiet preparation. Lydia washed Noah's clothes and hung them by the fire. She polished the boots she had worn only once before. She braided her hair and unbraided it again until it lay right against her shoulders. Caleb rode out at dusk and returned after dark with a tired look and ink on his fingers. "They'll all be there," he said. "Church will be full." Lydia nodded. She placed the wooden star at Noah's throat and tied the ribbon firm. "Then so will we." Sunday morning came bright enough to hurt. The church filled early. Coats brushed. Voices dropped. Lydia felt the eyes before she saw them. She took a seat in the front pew beside Caleb, Noah asleep against her chest. The wooden box sat at Caleb's feet. Garrett Crow watched from the aisle, lips pressed thin. Reverend Pike cleared his throat and opened the Bible. Before he could speak, Caleb stood. "With your permission, Reverend," he said, "I'd like a word." The room stilled. Caleb lifted the box and opened it. Inside lay the papers, neat, undeniable. "What I paid was a debt," Caleb said, voice carrying without strain, "to save a farm from foreclosure. What I give now is choice." He held up the deed. 200 acres, water rights, grazing, timber, in her name alone. A sound went through the church like wind through dry grass. She may leave, Caleb continued. She may stay. She owes me nothing. Lydia stood then, knees trembling only once. I stay because I want to, she said. I was given dignity when I had none. Silence held. An old woman rose in the back. I was wrong, she said, about both of you. Heads bowed, some in shame, some in thought. Outside, the winter sun spilled over the steps. Caleb took Lydia's hand in front of them all. She did not pull away. They walked out together, the wooden box empty now, the gift no longer lonely. Spring would come when it came. For now, the door stood open. The quiet after the church followed them home. Not the brittle quiet of judgment, but a deeper one. Like snow settling after a storm has spent itself. The porch boards creaked under their boots. The lamp still burned, steady as it had every night. A small, faithful circle of light holding back the dark. Inside, the house breathed. Caleb set the empty wooden box on the table and left it there. Lydia loosened Noah's wrap and felt the warmth he'd kept all morning press back into her palms. The fire crackled once, then settled. No one spoke for a long moment. Silas came in from the barn and stopped short when he saw their faces. He took his hat off without being told. Well, he said at last, that's done. Caleb nodded. It is. Silas glanced at Lydia, then at the baby. Welcome home, he said, and went back out to finish his work. Lydia moved through the house as if she were learning it again. She set Noah down near the hearth and fed him slowly, counting swallows the way she always did. She put the kettle on. She wiped the table where the papers had been, though there was nothing left to wipe. Caleb watched her hands, the way they moved with certainty now, the way they knew where things belonged. That night, the wind rose and fell without finding a crack. Lydia climbed the stairs with Noah and stopped at the door to the bedroom she had once locked against the world. The brass key lay on the washstand. She picked it up, turned it once in her fingers, then set it down again. The door stayed open. Downstairs, Caleb banked the fire and checked the bolt. He did not look up when Lydia's light spilled down the stairwell. He did not close it. I choose this, she thought, and the thought no longer hurt. Winter did not loosen its grip all at once. It came apart in pieces. A day when the snow softened underfoot. A night when the wind forgot to howl. A morning when Noah's cough did not return. Lydia learned the ranch by heart. She learned which boards sang when you stepped on them and which held quiet. She learned the measure of the pantry and the rhythm of the stove. She learned the sound of Caleb's boots and the sound of his silence. Caleb learned her too, not by asking, but by watching. He learned when to leave the room and when to stay just long enough to pass a cup across the table. He learned the hymn she hummed without words and the way she counted under her breath when worry crept in. They worked side by side without naming it. One morning, Lydia went to the yard with a small sack in her hands. The ground still held frost, hard and unwilling. She knelt anyway and broke the crust with the heel of her boot. Caleb watched from the fence. Those won't come easy, he said. I know, Lydia answered. She pressed the bulbs into the earth and covered them, firm and patient. They take time, he nodded. So do most good things. She planted 3 rows and marked them with small stones, so she would remember where to look. when the world forgot winter had ever been there. The town changed in smaller ways. Mrs. Hawkins waved once from the store. The sheriff tipped his hat and kept riding. Garrett Crow did not come back. His clean coat was seen less and less until it was not seen at all. At night, the porch lamp stayed lit. Sometimes Lydia sat beside Caleb on the steps, Noah asleep between them, and they watched the stars come on. Sometimes they said nothing. Sometimes they spoke of practical things, fences, feed, weather, because naming the future too early felt like tempting it. On Christmas Eve, Lydia hung the wooden star by the door where the light caught it. She tied the blue ribbon firm and stepped back. Caleb stood behind her, hands at his sides. "Looks right," he said. They bowed their heads then, not in a church full of eyes, but in a quiet room that knew them. Lydia prayed aloud this time, her voice steady, thanking God for shelter and choice and the courage to stay. Caleb said amen like a promise. Winter broke its hold in March. The first green showed where Lydia had planted, a stubborn thread pushing up through thawing earth. She knelt and touched it with a fingertip, careful not to bruise it. Caleb came up behind her and crouched, close but not touching. "There," he said softly. "They're early," Lydia said. "Spring's impatient," he answered. They stood and looked at the rose together. Noah toddled toward the threshold and put his hand on the doorframe, steadying himself. Lydia laughed, a sound that felt like a release she had earned. Caleb opened the door wider. Sunlight spilled across the floor and stopped where it always had, warming the place where fear once lived. The lock stayed where it was, unused. They stepped inside together. The door opened behind them, and the house took them in without asking what they had paid to be there. Spring did not arrive with ceremony. It came the way mercy often does, quiet, unannounced, and already at work before anyone thought to look for it. The frost retreated inch by inch. Water ran again along the shallow cuts in the land. The fence posts leaned and then were set straight. Lydia woke one morning to the sound of rain on the roof and did not reach for the brass key. She lay still and listened. The rain had weight to it now, a steady drumming that meant the ground would drink and not turn to ice. Noah slept on his stomach. One small hand curled against the sheet, breath easy. She watched him for a long moment and felt the old counting habit loosen its grip. Downstairs, the kettle sang. Caleb was already awake, sleeves rolled, a ledger open on the table. He did not look up when Lydia came down. He slid a cup toward her and pushed the ledger away, closing it with a soft tap. "Fence on the west line needs mending," he said. Posts shifted. "I'll bring the nails," Lydia answered. They worked in the rain with their hats low and their collars up, speaking only when the work asked for it. Lydia held the posts while Caleb set them. He lifted the hammer. She braced. The rhythm settled between them like a shared breath. When the rain eased, they leaned on the fence and watched the clouds pull apart. "No church today," Lydia said, not as a question. Caleb shook his head. "Not today." The town learned the new shape of things slowly. A boy rode up one afternoon with a note from Reverend Pike, an apology written in careful lines. Lydia read it once and set it by the lamp. She did not answer it. The silence was answer enough. Sheriff Caro came by to check the boundary lines and left with a nod and no questions. Mrs. Hawkins sent sugar again. this time with a note folded inside. For the boy, and for you. Garrett Crow's name drifted through town once more, and then did not return. He had found other accounts to keep. On a warm evening, Lydia brought a small box out to the porch and set it on the rail. Inside lay the brass key. She held it between her fingers, feeling its weight, remembering the nights when it had been a lifeline. She turned it once and smiled, a private thing, then placed it in the box and closed the lid. Caleb watched without comment. They ate supper on the porch as the light went gold and then blue. Noah crawled between their chairs and banged a spoon against the boards, delighted by the sound. Lydia laughed and reached to steady him. Caleb set his hand out too, not touching Lydia's, close enough to catch the boy if he tipped. A prayer rose without being asked for. Thank you. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Later that week, Lydia took the deed from the shelf and read it again by the window. She traced the lines with her finger, names, boundaries, rights that could not be taken by rumor or fear. She folded the paper and put it back where it belonged. Caleb stood behind her, not crowding. You don't have to keep it here, he said. I want to, she answered. The answer pleased him. He did not hide it. They planted apple saplings along the fence on a morning when the air smelled of turned earth. Lydia held the young trees steady while Caleb tamped the soil firm. Noah sat in the shade with Silas and learned to clap. These will take years, Silas said. Lydia wiped her hands on her skirt. So will we. Silas grinned and tipped his hat. One night, when the moon rose full and clear, Lydia stood at the bedroom door and looked back at the room that had once been a refuge and a prison both. She walked through it without stopping and went down the hall to the stairs. Caleb was at the table mending a strap. He looked up, surprised. She set her hand on the back of the chair and did not pull it away. Stay, he said. Not a command, not a claim. She stayed. The house learned their footsteps. The walls held their voices. The lock stayed unused, the key resting quiet in its box, a thing remembered but no longer required. Outside, the tulips broke through in a sudden scatter of color. Lydia knelt and touched them, careful, reverent. She called Caleb to see, and he came and crouched beside her. They made it, he said. So did we, she answered. They stood and looked at the rose together, the land stretching out ahead of them with all its honest work and unpromised days. The door behind them stood open, light spilling in. Nothing was owed. Everything was chosen. Summer did not rush them. It came the way it always had on that land. Slow mornings, long light, work that asked for your back and gave you quiet in return. Lydia woke with the sun and did not reach for Noah first thing because she could hear him already, talking to the world in soft, serious sounds from his cradle. She smiled before she stood. Downstairs, the house smelled of bread and dust and open air. Caleb stood at the table kneading dough with practiced hands, sleeves rolled, forearms dusted white. He looked up when Lydia entered and slid a cup toward her without thinking. She took it. The habit felt earned. They ate with the door open, the breeze moving the curtain just enough to remind them the world was wider than the room. Noah crawled from shadow to light and back again, fascinated by the line the sun drew across the floor. After breakfast, Lydia gathered nails and twine and walked the fence with Caleb. They spoke of the small things first, how the west posts leaned, where the creek had cut a new edge, Which corner needed watching when the storms came? When they spoke of the larger things, they did it without ceremony. "There's a schoolhouse going up," Lydia said, "by the river." Caleb set a post and tamped the earth firm. "You thinking of teaching?" "I am," she said. "Part-time, when he's older." He nodded, accepting the future the way he accepted weather, by preparing for it. They worked until noon and rested in the shade. Lydia hummed while she mended, a tune without words. Caleb sharpened tools. The sound of stone on steel rang clean and steady. In town, Copper Ridge learned new manners. Not all at once, not cleanly, but a woman nodded here, a hat tipped there. Reverend Pike passed Lydia on the street and stopped long enough to say, "Good morning," without asking anything of her. She returned the greeting and kept walking. Mrs. Hawkins came by one afternoon with a basket of peaches and a look that dared anyone to comment. Lydia thanked her and set the fruit out to cool. Noah ate one with both hands and juice down his chin. Mrs. Hawkins laughed, surprised by herself. That evening, as the light went soft, Lydia took the small wooden star from the door and wiped it clean. She did not take it down. She only turned it so it caught the sun better. Caleb watched from the steps. "You keeping that year-round?" She nodded. "It reminds me." "Of what?" She considered. "Of choosing." He smiled, the quiet one he did not use often. Later, after Noah slept, Lydia found the brass key in its box and held it once more. She felt its weight and set it back where it belonged. The box went onto the shelf beside the Bible, not hidden, not displayed. A thing remembered. Caleb stood in the doorway, not blocking the light. "You ready?" he asked. "For what?" He held up 2 cups and nodded toward the porch. "Stars." They sat side by side and watched the sky fill in. Lydia rested her hands in her lap. Caleb leaned back against the post. The night insects began their work. "I used to think safety was a lock," Lydia said. Caleb did not answer right away. He waited for the sentence to finish itself. "It isn't," she went on. "It's a door you open because you trust what's on the other side." He nodded. "And knowing you can close it." "Yes," she said, "if you need to." They sat with that truth until it settled. When autumn came, it came with apples. The saplings took hold, their leaves turning early. Lydia pressed one small fruit into Caleb's hand and watched him weigh it, thoughtful. "These'll last," he said. "They will," she answered. Winter returned, gentler this time. The porch lamp burned again. The fire held. Noah learned to walk, then to run, then to laugh so hard he fell down and got up again without crying. On Christmas Eve, they bowed their heads at the table. Lydia prayed aloud, simple and sure. Caleb said amen and meant it. Outside, snow fell soft and clean. Inside, the house held. The door stayed open a hand's width, just enough to let the light out, just enough to let grace in. The second winter tested them in quieter ways. Not with hunger, not with fear that clawed at the ribs, but with memory, the kind that returns when the world slows and asks what you intend to keep. Snow came early and stayed light. The creek held. The barn roof did not sag. The house had learned how to be warm without burning too hot. Lydia stood at the window one morning, Noah balanced on her hip, watching smoke lift straight from the chimney. She did not count his breaths anymore. She counted the days instead. How many since she last felt the need to brace herself before opening a door? Caleb came in stamping snow from his boots. He set a folded paper on the table and left it there. "What's that?" Lydia asked. "Notice," he said. "Town meeting. About the schoolhouse." She read it once. "They want you there." "They want us," he corrected. The meeting filled the old hall by the tracks, not the church this time. Benches scraped. Men stood along the walls. Women gathered near the windows where the light fell better. Lydia took a seat beside Caleb, Noah on her lap, the wooden star peeking from beneath his coat. She felt eyes again, but different now. Less hunger, more question. The mayor cleared his throat and spoke of land and funds and where the school would sit. When he finished, a man Lydia recognized only by his voice stood. "Seems some folks here got land handed to 'em," he said, "without earning it." The room shifted. Caleb stood before Lydia could move. "That land was given," he said, calm as still water, "by me, to my wife, as the law allows." The man scoffed. "Bought, more like." Lydia felt the old heat rise and pass. She stood. "I earned it by surviving," she said. Her voice did not shake. "By choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. If that offends you, that's yours to carry." Silence followed, thick but not cruel. An older rancher cleared his throat. "Let the school be built," he said. "Girls got more sense than most of us." A few heads nodded. The matter moved on. Outside, the sky was clean and wide. Noah wriggled free and toddled a few steps before dropping into the snow, laughing. Lydia lifted him, brushing flakes from his coat. Caleb watched her, something like pride crossing his face. That night, Lydia took the deed down once more. She spread it on the table and smoothed it flat. Caleb sat across from her, waiting. "I want to add something," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A clause," she said. "If anything happens to me, Noah stays here. With you." Caleb did not answer right away. He swallowed once. "Only if that's what you want." "It is," she said. "Because I choose you. Still." He reached across the table then, slow, giving her time to pull away. She did not. They bowed their heads afterward, not over papers, but over the table itself. Lydia thanked God for steadiness, for work, for a man who never mistook possession for love. Winter deepened. The porch lamp burned. On a clear night close to Christmas, Lydia woke and found the house quiet. She went downstairs and saw Caleb standing by the window, hat in his hands. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Just thinking." She came to stand beside him. The reflection in the glass showed them together, neither in front of the other. "I was afraid once," she said softly, "that if I said everything out loud, it would break what we built." He shook his head. "Truth doesn't break solid things." She rested her head against his shoulder for the first time without thinking about it. He did not move away. Outside, the stars burned cold and sure. Inside, the light stayed on. The door was open, not because it had to be, because nothing was waiting on the other side anymore. The last thing winter took from them was its voice. By March, the wind no longer argued with the walls. It moved around the house instead, as if it had learned there was nothing left to claim inside. Lydia opened the door one morning and did not feel the need to check the sky. The ground was soft enough to take a boot print and give it back unchanged. Noah stepped out beside her, steady now, his hand catching the doorframe the way he always did, testing, trusting. Caleb stood at the fence with a coil of wire over his shoulder. He watched them cross the yard and set the wire down before either of them reached him. "Creek's up," he said. "Good for planting." Lydia nodded. "I'll bring the saplings." They worked without hurry. Caleb dug. Lydia set roots straight and packed the soil firm. Noah handed them stones one by one, serious with the duty. When the last tree stood, Lydia brushed the dirt from her hands and stepped back. "Think they'll hold?" she asked. Caleb studied the line. "They will if we tend them." She smiled at that. The town marked the season in small ways. The schoolhouse frame went up by the river. Lydia walked there twice a week with Noah and stayed until the light shifted, teaching letters to children who had never been asked to sit still before. She did not announce herself. She simply showed up and stayed. On the walk home, she passed the church and did not slow. One afternoon, Reverend Pike met her at the steps. He held his hat in both hands. "We were wrong," he said. Lydia looked at him, not unkindly. "I know." He nodded, relieved to be spared the rest. She walked on. At home, the house changed again. Caleb moved the wooden box from the table to the shelf and placed the deed inside it, folded once, then twice. Lydia added the brass key beside it, not as a warning, not as a relic, just as a record of where they had been. That night, after Noah slept, Lydia stood in the doorway of the room that had once been only hers. She looked at the bed, the window, the place where fear had lived like a second shadow. Caleb waited at the table, not watching. She closed the door behind her and did not lock it. When she came back down, she did not stop halfway. She crossed the room and sat beside him, close enough that their knees touched. He looked at her then, searching her face for permission. She gave it without words. "I thought love would feel like being taken," she said quietly, "or being saved." Caleb shook his head. "It feels like staying." "Yes," she said, "it does." They bowed their heads together after that, not because the day demanded it, but because gratitude had nowhere else to go. Lydia thanked God for shelter, for work, for the courage to choose again and again. Caleb said, "Amen," and this time the word carried warmth. Spring came all at once. The tulips Lydia had planted broke open in a scatter of color that stopped her in the yard. She knelt and touched them, laughing. Softly, the sound carried on the breeze. Caleb joined her and rested a hand on the fence, watching her like the sight was something he intended to remember. "They came through," he said. "So did we," she answered. On Easter morning, the door stood wide. Light spilled across the floor and reached the far wall, warming the place where the lock had once mattered. Noah ran in and out, testing the threshold, claiming it as his own. Lydia watched him and felt no pull to gather him back inside. Later, when the sun dropped low and the work was done, she and Caleb sat on the porch steps. The land stretched out before them, marked, tended, chosen. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, surprised to find it true. Caleb did not answer with words. He reached for her hand, slow, giving her time to refuse. She did not. They sat like that until the stars came on. the porch lamp glowing behind them, the door open at their backs. Not because it had to be, because this was where they lived now, and nothing was waiting to take it away. As the years passed, the house learned their names the way old walls always do. Not loudly, not all at once, but board by board, season by season. What began in fear settled into something steadier, shared work, open doors, and choices made without being forced. She never forgot the girl who counted 12 steps to escape. She honored her by never living that way again. And he never forgot the moment he chose not to claim, but to stand beside. Love, they learned, was not a rescue or a bargain. It was patience. It was dignity. It was staying every single day by choice. The porch light still burns at dusk. The door still opens to the evening air. And in that quiet glow lives a truth many of us recognize only later in life. The strongest homes are built not from ownership, but from respect, faith, and kindness given freely. If this story touched a memory in your heart, of a hard winter, a second chance, or a love that grew slowly, we invite you to share it with us. Please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe for more Western stories of faith and enduring love, and leave a comment telling us what city or town you're watching from. Your stories matter here.